Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Thursday, February 24th Audit Committee meeting. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome our new members, both board members and Audit Committee members. We will get to some introductions a little bit later in our agenda. To start off, welcome to those that are new to the group. We will kick things off. I'm Dan Holdhouse. I'm the Vice Chair of the Audit Committee. Our chair was not able to make the meeting in person, so I will be chairing this evening's meeting. We will begin the meeting with Mr. Kevin Vaughn from our external audit firm, Plattenberg. So, Kevin, if you would like to come up and give your presentation.
My name is Kevin Vaughn, and I'm with Plattenberg and Associates. We're the contracted auditors through the Ohio State Auditor's Office. And I'm going to be going over the results of the fiscal year 21 audit that was completed back toward the end of December. So you got several documents in your packet. One thing I won't go in detail over is audit communication letter. And it's just a few pages, and it has a December 30th, 2021 date at the top. There's no cover on it. And that letter is not one of the audit reports. It's very boilerplate. It contains required audit communications that are required by auditing standards, covers what we consider to be the key estimates and disclosures, and if there were any difficulties or disagreements with management during the audit. Which, since I mentioned that, I'll just note that there were none. And then some other matters related to the audit. But you can look through that on your own time, but I wanted you to know what that letter was for. So you were given single audit reports, and this is a packet of all of our audit reports. If you go in that, there's a table of contents. Kind of lays everything out. It starts with the district's schedule of federal expenditures. That's basically all the federal grants the district had expenditures on in fiscal 21. It has a note, a little page of notes that goes with that schedule. And then there's several different audit reports that are required on a governmental audit. The first one would be page 3. Which is the Yellow Book report, which is covered by government auditing standards. And then on 5 is a 2-page report. That's the uniform guidance or single audit reports on the federal grant programs. And then we're going to concentrate on page 7. That is a schedule of findings and question costs. And that gives a nice summary of all these reports. So if you go to page 7 in the single audit reports, this lays out, it's a fairly standard format. So it starts off and it has the financial statement opinion is what it starts off with at the top. And that was unmodified, which would be considered a clean audit report. And then the next section covers what we would call the Yellow Book report, which is your government auditing standards. And it's a report on internal control and compliance in our audit. But one thing I want to point out when you look in detail at those reports, we don't give an opinion on compliance, or on internal controls or compliance, but we do obviously have to do key testing in that area under government auditing standards to be able to give our opinion and meet those standards. And on those reports, I just want to point out that there were no material weaknesses and no significant deficiencies and no non-compliance noted. So that's good. That's a clean Yellow Book report. The federal awards audit, there's this next section covers quite a bit of information on that. This report's set up in a similar format. It has internal controls and compliance, but this is specifically related to the major federal grant programs. So there's basically risk assessments we have to do. The federal government lays those out in the guidance and in the statutes on how those are calculated, what percentage coverages we have to meet, what constitutes high-risk program, low-risk program. We go through a whole process. We identified 3 major federal programs in the fiscal 21 audit: elementary, secondary school emergency relief fund, which is one of the new COVID grants, coronavirus relief fund, and then a grant that's been around for quite a while, the adult education. Those were our 3 programs that we concentrated on. And in that audit of those programs, we did not identify any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. And our report on compliance was unmodified, which again is a clean opinion. If we had a major issue, we would modify our opinion. And we had no audit findings that were required to be disclosed per that CFR section. And one thing they make us note, which affects how much of the programs we test, is whether you're a low-risk auditee or a high-risk auditee. And the district was a low-risk auditee for fiscal 21. And then down there at the bottom, findings related to financial statements required to be reported in accordance with GAGIS, none. Federal award findings and question costs, none. So as you can see, the fiscal 21 was a very clean audit for the district. I don't know if you received the annual comprehensive financial report. I don't usually go over that in a lot of detail in this meeting. There's not a lot of comparative, but I did want to point out, if when you do see a copy of that, that's the financial statements. In the management discussion and analysis, there's a table 1 and table 2, and it kind of gives a nice consolidated statement of financial position or statement of net position that's on page 5. I'm not sure that you have a copy of that, but if you have the annual comprehensive report, look in the MD&A, and if you start looking from fiscal 20 to fiscal 21, you're going to have some questions, because there's definitely some big fluctuations in there. And I was just going to kind of hit the highlights on those. One thing you'll note is on the net position, which is the balance sheet, the long-term liabilities increased by $49 million. And that's covered in our footnotes in note 12. That's basically the net pension liability. And those numbers are calculated at the state level. And then there's apportionments based on the number of employees of the district. And there's calculations that go into that. But those numbers do tend to fluctuate. They can go up and down year to year. But if you notice your long-term liability is having a significant increase, that's what that is. Another thing on the net position is deferred inflows of resources. It's down under the liabilities. There's a significant, like $100 million change in property taxes. And I'm going to cover that if you look at if you have the table 2, which is the statement of revenues and expenses and changes in net position. I will cover what goes on that. So related to the property taxes, with the pandemic going on, Hamilton County, and I believe all counties in the state, extended their tax deadline from June, I think the end of June to the end of July or sometime in August. So with the district having the fiscal year June 30th, it changed when the taxes were due. Usually, since the taxes are for the following fiscal year, the state auditor's guidelines says that you only pick up revenue. You only recognize revenue on what they call advances available. So that's money the county has in the bank that the district could draw an advance on. So what happened was everybody took advantage, or a lot of people took advantage of paying late. And that changed that advance number, which was usually pretty consistent from June to June. So that made the revenue number, I don't have the 19 number, but just to give you an idea, when you look at this, the property tax revenue for fiscal 21 was $473 million. If you look at the comparative, it's about $286 million. So when you see that, you're going to really wonder what's going on. So that's why I'm pointing this out. And then that also affected that deferred inflow calculation that I mentioned before. It all goes into this. And you'll notice also the charges for services, $1 million drop in revenue, which is over 10%. That's related mainly to food services. And with the pandemic, the federal government went to a stance that all children in schools receive free lunches. That they no longer made it needs-based. Basically, the parents, it didn't matter what the parents made, everybody gets a free lunch. So all the districts we audit, we're seeing basically a lot of those charges go way down because the only thing they're getting money for are the extras that children buy in addition to the daily meal. So one other big change on there is the category other revenue. And a big driver on that is the investment income. Again, with the pandemic and the drop in interest rates and everything, the district's investment income from fiscal 20 to fiscal 21 dropped 6.3 million, dropped from about 7.3 million down to less than $1 million because of the effects of the pandemic on the markets. So those were just a few highlights I wanted to cover because I know if anybody had that, they were probably going to ask those questions. Or if you go, when you have time and you get that full report, start looking through it, you're probably going to have some questions on those numbers. So that's mainly what I needed to go over here. If anybody has any questions on the audit.
Doesn't look like we have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Lauren, would you like to come up and do I guess let's start with new member introductions. I think we'll start over with Lauren and just kind of go around so that not only the new members introduce themselves, but also we introduce ourselves to the new members.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lauren Roberts, and I'm the Chief Audit Executive here at Cincinnati Public Schools. I've been with the district about 6 years now, and welcome to our new members. I really look forward to working with you this year.
My name is Mike Morosky. I serve on the Board of Education on the Finance Committee, which is why I'm sitting here today with you all. And believe it or not, this is not our full-time job. So when I'm not doing this, the Executive Director of the Human Services Chamber of Hamilton County, working with 90-plus agencies in the county to move the county forward on behalf of everybody. So it's an honor to be here. And for what it's worth, really, really appreciate the work of this committee. Ms. Bolton keeps us informed. And I know with great certainty from being in a lot of networks around the state and the country of people that do this, that we're pretty unique to have a group like y'all to meet. So thank you. It means a lot.
I'm Eve Bolton, and I am a member of Cincinnati School Board. I think this is my 14th year, and proud chair of the Finance Committee, and brag on all of you all the time. And thank you so much for your service to us and the kids and the district.
My name is Carol Mitchell Lawrence. I am a audit committee member. I work for Macy's Department Stores, Director of HR Technology.
My name is Christine Fisher. I'm an audit committee member. I work for a company called POSIP that helps schools better hear from parents, and I am a CPS parent myself.
My name is Jim Crossett. I'm a member of the audit committee. I'm the CFO of a company called Mesa Industries, and I am a CPS alumni.
My name is Dan Holdhouse. Today I'm serving as the audit chair. I'm normally the audit committee chair, normally the vice chair. I am a partner in a CPA firm here in Cincinnati called Barnes Denig, and I am also a proud CPS alum.
Hello, my name is David Foote. I am a member of the audit committee. I'm a CPA and a career internal auditor, currently in healthcare at Mercy Health. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Clarice Warner. I am an audit committee member. I am a certified healthcare compliance official, and I am the founder of the Professional Reimbursement Network, LLC, and I am also a proud CPS alumna.
Hi, I'm Liz Guttridge. I am an audit committee member. I am a CPA, currently working with Niehaus Financial Services. I am a former auditor in public accounting, and I am a CPS alum and a parent.
Hello, Paul Kitzmiller, first time, long time, new audit committee member. I am currently the controller at Belterra Park. I am not a CPS alum, but I have a CPS, proud CPS parent.
And I'm Brandon Craig. I am also a member of the Budget and Finance Committee for the board, as I'm a board member. So that's what gets me here as well. In my normal day job, I work for University of Cincinnati as the current interim executive director of non-discrimination policy administration. It's a long title. And I am also a CPS alum.
My name is Kimberly Hughes. I am the assistant treasurer with the district. This is year 21 for me, and I am actually filling in for our treasurer, Jennifer Wagner. So thank you all for the work that you do for the district.
Okay, thank you and welcome everyone. Lauren, I'll turn it over to you to cover some of these other housekeeping items.
Yep, absolutely. So 2 quick housekeeping items. The first that you have in your packet is the conflict of interest and related party form. I did receive some of them via email, but if you haven't had the chance, I kindly ask that you complete this and just turn it into myself or any of my team today. We do like to complete those on an annual basis just to make sure we are compliant as the audit committee. And then second, you'll see in your packet is the 2022 committee schedule. So this schedule includes all of the board committees, as well as, of course, here at the bottom, the audit committee dates. So we went ahead and put together some projected dates. So these are recommended as a draft. So if there are conflicts or any discussion that we'd like to have today, we do have the opportunity to adjust if needed. You'll notice the ones that are highlighted in gray here on the paper are different cadence than our typical Wednesday due to other scheduling conflicts we face. So I'll turn it over to Dan to confirm with the group that we don't have conflicts, and then we can conclude those 2 items.
Does anyone have any issues with the proposed dates? Okay, hearing and seeing none, we will go ahead and confirm those dates. Okay, moving on, I would like to invite Dr. Ross Turpo and Keith Grace forward to give us an update on the benefits.
Well, I'll go ahead and start us off. So I'd first like to thank our wonderful benefits team for joining us here today. Let's go ahead and begin with introducing yourselves, if you don't mind, since we have some new folks with us.
There we go. All right, I didn't get the tutorial you guys got. Good afternoon. Hi, my name is Keith Grace, and I am the benefits manager here with Cincinnati Public Schools.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Ross Turpo. I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition and Staffing.
Wonderful. So I'll participate in the start of this conversation, then I'll turn it on over to our wonderful benefits folks. So if we could move on to our first slide. Since this is a new group of us a bit here today, I wanted to provide a bit of background and context for today's conversation. So on February 26, 2020, Internal Audit released a benefits audit report. So you'll see in the electronic version of these PDFs, you can click the link that is underlined benefits audit report, and it'll take you to the full report if you would like to review. But for those who may have forgotten it's been a little time, or those who are new, the scope of the project is outlined above on that table. So we focused on the calendar year of 2019 and we covered the benefits that are listed there. So we predominantly focused on the primary medical benefits that the district offers. Move on to our next slide, please. So the result of that report and that audit were 10 recommendations. So you can see the 10 recommendations listed in the table in front of you, and you'll also notice there are risk ratings associated. So the purpose of the risk ratings was to help our board, audit committee, and management members understand what is the highest priority and the greatest risk, and from a management perspective, help prioritize what should be addressed first and foremost. On to our next slide, we have a bit more background regarding the timeline of the work. So in August of 2020, the audit committee requested the benefits team provide bi-monthly updates at our audit committee meetings due to the significance of the report and the findings to ensure the implementation was occurring in a timely and efficient manner. Additionally, it's important to note there was a shift in management that occurred in June 2021 when our historic HR and talent departments merged together and new leadership took place, which brings us Dr. Ross Tarpeau and Assistant Superintendent Susan Bunty. Additionally, in April 2020, the benefits team engaged an outside consulting and accounting firm, BKD, to assist with the implementation of the solutions that address the findings from the audit. The hope of this work was to better identify the root cause of the issue and come up with an action plan for remediation. So it's important to note that internal audit has served the role over the past couple of years as somewhat of an intermediary between our benefits folks, management, and the board and audit committee to assist with accountability. The fine line that we walk, of course, is maintaining our independence and objectivity and can't truly intervene in the implementation of the solutions and recommendations. So with that all being said, I'll turn it over to Mr. Keith Grace to give us an update as to what's been completed since the last presentation in, I believe, October of 21. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, and good afternoon again. A cross-departmental project team was put together to address the findings, along with the professional services firm that was engaged. We have regularly scheduled meetings to discuss how to attack each item. Project updates were provided to the executive team on a regular basis. This provided layers of oversight, accountability, and transparency to the project. These meetings are still scheduled to take place on a continual basis. Next, please. Here you can see the initial findings along with when the design to mitigate the finding was put into place, tested, and validated as complete. The control frequency for each item is also listed here. Next, please. Again, you can see our review schedule. This schedule and these controls allow us to stay on top of these items and meet our desired outcomes. These items are also reported back to leadership as another layer of accountability with this process. Next up, I'm going to let Dr. Tarpeau address next steps.
Thank you, Keith. Okay, next slide, please. So just looking at next steps, where we are right now, what we're going to do is continue with the regular review of our internal controls that Keith mentioned earlier, and we've created lots of new checklists to ensure that we're following our process. We're going to be performing many desk audits to make sure that we're doing what we say we're supposed to be doing. We're going to also look at some digital enhancements with using some technology and some new resources that were some new learnings as we went through this process. And then we're going to be working closely with our internal audit team on future process audits. There were several new learnings as we went through this process. As you know, the timeline is pretty long that we've gone through this, but we learned a lot through this process. And one of those things is just leveraging our current technology, making sure that we're using all the tools that are already available to us and making sure they're embedded in our processes. We're also continuing to seek out automation in the future as well. We know that we're not where we want to be, but we're moving in that direction by tapping into additional resources that we found as we went through this process. And then we're going to utilize and customize current reporting to meet our needs. So that is where we're at currently, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone in the committee have any specific questions?
I do. Are there plans, Lauren, to follow up and redo your testing, or have you been working with the department to kind of review the implementation of the new processes and make sure that you think they're going to fit the bill and do what they're supposed to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a conversation we just had in preparation for today's presentation. And I think it's a twofold, like you just mentioned. So I think our ultimate goal as an internal audit group, and ultimately, if I may speak for the audit committee, would be that we revisit this audit, do it through a follow-up and reperform the test and ultimately see if the remediations that are put in place are functioning as intended, and give ourselves as a board, as an audit committee, and hopefully as a community reassurance that things have been corrected from what we initially discovered. So I think that's the long-term conversation. And what's the most immediate conversation that we recently had was when they complete, meaning the benefits team completes an area and they feel pretty confident that it is remediated, we've offered our time to go in and perform some kind of ad hoc, off-the-cuff tests where we just run the reports and reperform the tests as needed to give some more immediate feedback. So that way the management team can understand, okay, are we really ready for this next audit, or is there some more work that needs to be done? And I think the thing that we have conversed about, and my understanding from the audit committee and our expectation as an audit group, is committing to a more solid timeline now that we are working away more so from BKD, and this team's, the management team is really taking the full lead in finalizing the implementation of recommendations. So our hope is by the time we come back to you next time, we have some clear action steps with timelines, and perhaps that information will help inform us as we go into planning for fiscal 23. Is fiscal 23 audit plan, can it include a follow-up of benefits, or is that not sufficient timing? So I know we're ready to get back in there, but also we want to be mindful that we want to have all the remediations truly in place first.
Is BKD done with their project? Have they concluded their work?
Yes, they are complete at this time.
Okay. Was that helpful? I mean,
it was extremely helpful. I mean, what we learned from them is just really where we need to be going with automation and enhancements. So getting that perspective really helped us to kind of get laser focused on where we're headed in the future.
Well, thank you for your time, and thank you for the report. I think it has been a long, I was going to make an observation, but do you have a question that you'd like to ask? No? Well, it might sound like it's supposed to end when I'm done, so why don't you ask your question?
I was just wondering if there's any wins that you could share from some of these implementations already, where you've either caught something that didn't follow the process or just efficiency and improving.
Yeah, absolutely. As Dr. Turco mentioned, BKD helped us with the leveraging of some of the technology that's available to us, and where that has manifested itself brightly for us is through the COBRA and leave process and that billing process. So where that was a manual process where we were writing invoices out by hand, where we were sending them out ourselves and getting them returned to us, now that is a more automated practice. What we have now is we're leveraging the accounts receivable module, and the invoices are entered into the system. They're tracked through the system, and they're mailed out so that we now can run an aging report to see where everyone stands with paying for their benefits. So that has really helped us out a lot.
Are there any other questions? So I was going to say that it has been a long 2 years with respect to the benefits audit, and I appreciate the efforts, and I know the audit committee appreciates the efforts that have gone into it. I know it hasn't been an easy process, but we do look forward to whether that is in fiscal year 22 or 23, doing an update so that I think we as a group recognize the importance of benefits and the importance of what that brings from an institutional risk and a financial risk. And so thank you for your efforts, and we look forward to continually improving. Okay, Lauren, would you like to jump into your audit reports?
Wonderful. So we're just going to take turns speaking here at the podium. We'll go ahead and start with introductions of the internal audit team as well as the members of management that were kind enough to attend this evening. I've learned over the years there's nothing better than having the members of management here to speak for themselves as to their experience during the audit as well as their future plans for the recommendations and the output of the work. So we'll go ahead and start. I guess we'll start with Joseph, if you don't mind. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Joseph Porter, and I am the Accounting Operations Manager. I am new to the district and new to government. I come from the corporate world.
Hi, I'm Emma Williams, and I'm the Internal Audit Supervisor, and I am also new to the district and new to the government world. I also came from corporate, so happy to be here.
Hello, my name is Trina Levis. I'm Purchasing Director. I've been here maybe 21 years, and I'm happy to be here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Isaac Karn. I am an audit staff member, and I started with the district in 2019 as an internal audit intern and then switched to full-time in 2020.
Well, thanks everyone. So our plan for these two audit reports. So typically we have one audit report at a time, but typically it was a team of 1 or 2 people. So I will first thank you all for the additional support in terms of staff numbers. Clearly, since Emma started at the end of October, we've been able to produce 2 reports concurrently, which is something we've never done before. So in terms of the logistics for covering the reports today, I think we're doing pretty well on time. So we'll start with the accounts payable report, which you have in your packet, and then we'll go into the procurement card follow-up report. If we'll just go ahead and start by kind of round robin, each of us speaking, talking you through the report. If there are any items that we come across as we're speaking that you'd like to stop us and ask questions, by all means, please do so. But then otherwise, we could save the conversation between internal audit management and the committee for the last 10 minutes of the 30 minutes we set aside. That would be fantastic. Wonderful. So we'll get right into it. So if you could please open the accounts payable report in front of you. And we will go ahead and start. Let's see here. Wonderful. So we'll go ahead and begin on page 3. So the feedback we've received over the years from the audit committee is, could we be a bit more succinct and right to the point? So right to the point, internal audit performed a full audit of, oh, I have the wrong report in front of me. There we go. Performed an audit of the accounts payable process. And the reason we did so was from an introduction or request from our treasurer's office. So I'll hand it over to Ms. Kim Hughes to give a bit more information.
Thank you, Lauren. Within the Treasurer's Office, we've worked diligently to ensure that best practices are being followed with regard to not process improvement, but with regard to processing our actual invoices in our accounts payable team. But we knew that there were some potential areas that we could benefit from process improvement, so we reached out to our internal audit team, and they were able to provide us with further insight and recommendations on what we could do to actually improve. Thank you, Op. Thank you, Lauren.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kim. So we were excited to be brought in. So our initial introduction and interaction with accounts payable was last fiscal year via an advisory project. That allowed us to kind of jump ahead. It was an additional project we tossed into the plan. And so we were able to get our walkthroughs and basic information under control in 2021. So this year in fiscal 22, we performed a full-scale audit, as Kim was saying. And so the biggest takeaway from this project was that the accounts payable processes are working well. We didn't see any major or significant control issues or deficiencies. But the biggest takeaway is due to the large volume of transactions that accounts payable is processing, it is important to transition the work from a manual nature, as it currently is, to more of an automated process with automated controls. So moving on to the next page, there is a summary of the objectives of the audit. So this table includes 6 objectives, and within the table you can see 2 categories of risk rating and an audit rating. So starting with the audit rating, essentially this is the internal audit evaluation of how successful were these objectives via our testing. On the other hand, you can see the risk rating, which indicates the significance or materiality of the area. So these 2 pieces put together help both inform the audit committee, board, as well as management, like we mentioned before in the benefits work, how to prioritize and address items. And so this is a bit of a new assessment approach that we've brought. So there is an explanation below the table about each of the ratings. So jumping onto the next page, onto page 5, a bit of information about accounts payable just to frame the conversation. So accounts payable is responsible for processing the payments for goods, services, and non-salary expenses for the entire district. Figure 1 shows the reporting structure of the accounts payable team, which is within the treasurer's office. So as you can see, it's a rather small team considering the sheer volume of transactions that are processed. And so speaking of the volume of transactions, Appendix 1 at the back of the report goes through 3 graphical representations as to the volume of the transactions. And we even go as far as to break it out here on the first page as to how many transactions each member of this accounts payable team processes on a daily basis. So we're seeing that an individual technician is processing 33 invoices a day, 721 invoices a month. And so that exponentially is truly a lot of transactions when they are done in such a manual way. So as I mentioned before, the biggest takeaway from this audit is the need to automate due to the number of insignificant volume of transactions. I'll go ahead and turn this over to Isaac to talk us through the first objective.
Okay. So the first objective was to determine the effectiveness of the accounts payable process through reviewing the manual, employee training materials, and technology utilization. Internal audit kind of used the first objective to go into a little bit more detail around our advisory work and start to pull data and additional documentation outside of just AP with the financial technology team, as well as some procurement documentation, just to get an in-depth understanding of how accounts payable operates. And so basically, this was just an extensive documentation review. And this was good for us to kind of set the scene before we develop our testing and the other objectives. And so even though we didn't test anything in this objective, we did come up with 2 recommendations for management. The first recommendation being that management should update their manual and procedure documents to include the current procedures and then screenshots reflecting the updated Business Plus interface. There was just an update to our financial technology we use and we just recommend they update that. And then the second recommendation being in the documentation review, we did pull segregation of duties data as well as documentation. And we began to look at some of the data and to determine if the segregation of duties were proper. And going into that, we did recommend that the management perform an entire system access review over all of the user roles in Business Plus, just to ensure that the proper segregation of duties do exist outside of AP even. Did we want to do management response after each objective? Okay. Any questions with objective 1? Okay.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, your objective was just to learn the department, not to audit at this point.
Primarily, yes, that was the objective 4. That was what we were doing for objective 1. We also included our walkthrough, and we performed interviews with various employees throughout the AP team and treasurer's office. So essentially, yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and some of our other audits, we try to use objective 1 to kind of set the scene with the rest of the audit. Any other questions?
So when will you go back to actually perform the audit? I guess I shouldn't. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. So the rest of the objectives, we actually perform tests, and then we'll kind of get into everything else now.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. All right, so going on to objective 2, this was to determine the accuracy of the accounts payable process, invoice entries, receiving data, and payment transactions. This observation rating was generally satisfactory, and the risk level was high. Prior to designing the tests for this data, we did meet with Kevin Vaughn, who presented earlier, to get a better understanding of what our external auditors perform with relation to accounts payable. And so after the meeting with him, we designed our test to address completeness and accuracy within accounts payable. And then we also used targeted tests to identify aspects of the process that can be enhanced to maximize efficiency. So going into the testing methodology, we did judgmentally sample or select 40 accounts payable paid transactions. So this was the first test for this objective. And we did test for 6 different attributes, and that is in the table there, and then on the next page. I'm not going to go too into detail with the results or the attributes we tested, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to let us know.
I have a question. Is the one sample that had exceptions in all 6 attributes, is there a story there that we can understand, like what type of invoice that was and where the breakdown was?
Yeah, so with some previous management, so we looked at fiscal year 21, and we recently had some change in management in accounts payable. For the one test selection, we could not find any evidence of a purchase order or invoice for that specific one. And so when we went into review with the current accounts payable manager, she explained that some of the payments were tracked through various Excel documents previously, and that they aren't performing payments that way anymore. And so in another test, that's I think objective 3, you'll see there's another one with 2 that had exceptions for all of them, and that is the same case for that one as well. Yeah, those were the 6 attributes that we tested, and this resulted in 2 recommendations. With the 6th attribute we tested, it has to do with invoices that we receive from vendors. And so the recommendation we gave was to inform the vendors at least once a year about a good and proper invoice, and or supply a template invoice for them to ensure that vendors are submitting invoices that have all the necessary information on it. And that's not a requirement, it just prolongs the payment process of having to reach out, and creates more time in that process. And so the second recommendation was for the accounts payable team to leverage the analytic tool we did. So I'll jump back up right above the recommendation piece. My apologies. So we also performed, in addition to the sample testing, a population review for all invoices greater than $100 posted in fiscal year 21. And in this, we focused on repetitive invoices and numbers with the same vendor and or purchase order. So this extensive analysis resulted in 9 potential items for further investigation. And after going into those, they did not result in any true errors. And so our second recommendation was for AP to utilize that analytic to catch any potential duplicate payments in the future.
Can you talk a little bit about the one item here where there was no verification of proper public purpose?
Yeah, so that one specifically has to do with the selection that failed every attribute. And so since there was no documentation or anything for us to look at, we couldn't say it was a pass.
I guess, can you infer that it is, even though there's no documentation, I guess is my question.
I would have to go back and look at what the exact transaction was for. Lauren, can you recall?
So what we did in that situation for the one that failed all 6 of the attributes was it escalated to a level of being what we would consider significant in the context of this test. So Isaac was fantastic in summarizing what he saw, communicated this to the treasurer's office and accounts payable team immediately. And so what we've done, so every item that you see up here as an exception, it was immediately communicated to management as we went through the audit. So what's happening now in terms of next steps is for management to research this, dig deeper, and make sure that this was in fact proper public purpose. At the end of the day, we want to ensure if for some reason we can't substantiate this payment, that we take the following remediation actions that are required, because certainly we would prefer to do that voluntarily ourselves versus having an external audit require that of us. So that's kind of the notion that you'll see through this report as well as the key card report. Is we worked really closely with our management team. So as soon as we complete a test, the next day of, we're on a meeting discussing what we found so they can start to do the work to remediate. So both of these reports, you'll see kind of this initial, well, we've remediated what we found, but what was the root cause and how do we avoid that moving forward? So I do feel confident that we have good action plans in place for both the AP findings as well as the P card findings, that everything we discovered during the audit, all of those numbers you see up there, those have all been turned over to management to identify. However, the longer term conversation and where we need them to prioritize the higher risk areas are to design processes, implement controls to prevent this from happening in the future. Thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions around objective 2? And management, did you want to respond? Awesome.
I'll be brief on my part. So some of the things that we worked on to fix this, we sent I've been here for 8 months. Prior to me, we would send out communication to vendors once annually to basically give them an idea of what we're looking for as far as invoices. Going forward, we're going to be sending out communication semi-annually, and also talk to the AP supervisor if we can draft, like Lauren suggested, a generic invoice to send to the vendors so that they know specifically these are the fields that we're looking for with every single invoice. It's more of a issue with smaller vendors. Our larger vendors are used to dealing with purchase orders and invoices, different fields. So we definitely want to communicate that a lot more frequently to our smaller vendors on a more regular basis. Another big part that I'm happy on this is the automation part. So as soon as I came here, I noticed it's a 100% manual process with the AP team. You have 4 people processing close to 40,000 invoices manually every single year. So there's a lot of time management issues that we run into, and also the risk of just manual errors. Like I said, 40,000 invoices manually being entered into the system and then being processed and then have to go through payment process. So it just creates a massive bottleneck. So we've been in discussions with US Bank to automate that process regarding AP invoice entry. So instead of them manually entering invoices, each 40,000 invoices, US Bank has software that will be able to upload those and pull the data directly off and communicate that with our ERP. So we're in the process of that right now. We haven't finalized the contract, so I can't say anything on that part, but we're in discussions, and so far things look good. Did anyone have any questions?
Awesome. Going on to objective 3, and I also just wanted to note that for the sample testing we did in the previous objective as well as this one, we did judgmentally sample, and so we did look through the population and pick out items that did look abnormal and did kind of look different in the sense that were they missing a few things, were they different from the others. So I just wanted to note that these weren't randomly selected. So objective 3 is evaluating the compliance with invoicing and the reimbursement requirements. Just a little bit of background, the expense reimbursements are also processed, approved, and paid through the accounts payable team. This observation rating was generally satisfactory and the risk level was high. With a smaller amount of transactions through reimbursements, we did judgmentally sample 15 of them. The attributes that we tested for are similar to the previous testing performed in objective 2. There's just a different population. And so those were the results that we found from this testing. And the recommendation that we provided from this was that internal audit, or we recommend that the AP team who processes the reimbursement fill out and attach a travel expense checklist and guideline just to ensure that the reimbursement is complete, accurate, and is allowable. So Lauren's going to talk about the second test completed for this objective.
Great. So you'll see a lot of synergy between this expense reimbursement as well as the conversation we're going to have about P-card. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach. So for travel, incidentals, things of that nature, those who perhaps don't have a P-card can do this expense reimbursement. Alternatively, those who have the P-card do their expenses via the card. However, we recommend there be additional essentially reconciliation between the standards because the processes have kind of developed on their own and really certain things have certain controls. And so we recommend that they reconcile those and ensure that checklist is consistent because travel is travel, whether we're paying for it via reimbursement or via our district card. So with that being said, this next test was a test that we actually utilize in both the AP audit as well as P-card. And so what I did is I utilized the full population of employee reimbursements that went to employees who are also cardholders to ensure the items that they're asking for reimbursement for are not items that they actually purchased using the district card, which is district paid. So we did find one anomaly actually of an overpayment, which resulted in an overpayment of $1,206. So it was one instance of the full population where essentially the wires just got crossed and the P-card documentation ended up with the reimbursement person in accounts payable, and it was sent to the employee via a direct deposit. So the employee didn't even notice it in their bank account, presumably. And so that was an instance where a control would have caught that situation. So the recommendation in terms of the immediate, the immediate actions that have taken place were that we reported this to the accounts payable supervisor. She immediately notified the employee, and we have already invoiced that employee for repayment of the $1,200. But the long-term conversation is how do we design a process that reconciles employee reimbursements for people who are also cardholders to ensure it's not an overlap. So that's where the Treasurer's Office is currently in discussions of designing additional review, essentially routing from accounts payable, those submissions, over to our P-card reconciliation specialist to review all of the transactions for that cardholder to make sure it is not a transaction made on a district P-card.
So Lauren, this says 1 of 28, but on the P-card report, there are 271 cardholders. So it seems to me that there are way more than 28 transactions that are going on. So we have an error of 1 of thousands of transactions, not 1 of 28. Is that a fair
So actually think of it reverse. So essentially it's kind of unusual for someone who has a P-card to be submitting reimbursements. The only time, so I'm a P-card holder myself, so the only reimbursement I typically submit is for mileage, since that wouldn't happen on my P-card. However, we probably need to think through the standards and requirements. So do we allow P-card holders to submit for reimbursement for travel incidentals or travel expenses? And so that's what we're seeing. So there were 28 instances where someone who, the full population were employee reimbursements. It was filtered for only those employees that have a card holder, that are a card holder. And so there are only 28 reimbursements given to P-card holders. So it is the full population, but we're looking at the full population from an employee reimbursement perspective.
Okay, that's helpful because what I don't want this to insinuate is that there's some sort of extrapolated error of much more significant overpayment.
Correct. So that's a full population analysis of 2021, and we're going to do that same analysis of 22 to date, just to make sure nothing else came through, just to give feedback to the Treasurer's Office and correct if needed. But this wasn't a malintent or anything of that nature, which I was glad to see. The controls that are in place is that a purchase order must be in place for a reimbursement to occur, and the purchase order has the vendor as the employee. So it would be very unlikely that a purchase order that has the P-card as the vendor could be switched around. So essentially that's another level of control, is that vendor is locked into the PO as well. I hope that helps explain a bit. Any other questions? All right, wonderful. So I'll hand it back to Isaac, and I think we're chugging along. We'll try to make the last few pretty quick here for AP.
So on to objective 4 was to evaluate the accounts payable aging process. And essentially for this objective, we wanted to test the effectiveness of the escalation plan that's in place. And so on the next page, there is a graph that shows payables in various aging categories dated back to June of 2019. We just wanted to include that in there because the AP team tracks this data in their key performance indicator meetings, and so we added that in. Going on to the testing methodology, we judgmentally sampled. We tested 3 invoices, one from each of the classifications. Going into this test, we all had a AP management as well as internal audit had a pretty good idea that the escalation plan that was in place was not being followed effectively, so we didn't want to waste some of our time going through lots of samples. And so after testing the escalation plan, we recommend that an enhanced and documented process to address these payables should be completed. And the AP team is performing some other things outside of that escalation plan to get these payments made. And so we just encourage them to document that and make sure that it is being followed. That was objective 4. Any questions? Any response from management? Okay, perfect.
I'll explain. So the AP 1250 report is the AP aging report. It is a report inside of Business Plus, which is our ERP. Everyone in the district has access to it, but unfortunately we can't convince everyone to actually go in there and access it and pull it. So what we did was have the AP supervisor pull the AP aging report and send that out to everyone. And we just simplified it and put some pivot tables in there. So it's very simple for everyone to pull their information on there, just filter by whatever BUD unit that they're in or school or name. So it's pretty simplified. There's unfortunately no way to truly automate it per department. So that's something we can continue to discuss. But also in the escalation plan, we're currently working on that to implement that as well. And that will be shared department-wide. And again, AP automation will help with this due to time management. If you're manually entering 4,000 invoices, 40,000 invoices, it makes it more difficult to follow up on the escalation. So we're strongly pushing forward to get the automation into play so that we can free up some time to tackle these areas much harder. Does anyone happen to have any questions?
Is there any understanding on the drivers of what's causing the aging? So it sounds like a lot of the focus was on giving visibility to the aging, but curious about any of the causes of payments not being made on time.
One of the biggest drivers is receivers. So we need the person that actually ordered the product or service to actually say that I received it. So go ahead and pay. If they don't tell us that they received it, we're assuming that, services have never been rendered or the product hasn't been received. Therefore, we're not going to pay the vendor. So that's our biggest push. And that's where the escalation plan will come into play at. When someone doesn't receive it, we can go out and maybe escalate it to the assistant principal, the principal, or DSL, or, as high up as we have to go in order to get it received so that we can get the payment to go out as soon as possible.
I guess in the grand scheme of things, I would prefer that we don't pay it if we don't know if we've received it. So I guess that's,
Yeah,
one
we
way to
definitely
look
don't
at
want
it.
to send out any free checks.
In your automation, are you planning on creating some type of process flow that has like train stops for people who need to sign off so that you know where the bottleneck is occurring?
Yes, there are stages inside of the workflow where different approvals are required. And if those approvals aren't submitted, then it literally hits a roadblock with the invoice. And that's what's on the AP aging report are the roadblocks that are preventing specific invoices from being paid. And it'll show the details on the aging report of why is this not being paid. The AP team regularly goes in and updates those details.
Are you seeing recurring offenders?
No comment. No, I'm just joking.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
But that is something that you would address as well. Okay.
Yes.
Great.
There are some repeat offenders. Any other questions?
We're taking a little bit longer on the first one, Lauren. If we can, I don't want to gloss over things. So if there's important items in here, but if we could, kind of try to get back on track on timing. I don't want to not talk about important issues, but I also want to respect everyone's time.
Yep, so for objective 5, we were looking at determining if stopped and voided payments were tracked, recorded, and then posted correctly. Here we looked at 25 samples and noted that there were no exceptions and we were comfortable with management's detailed review. And then we recommended that they just continue the process as is. So we rated it as satisfactory.
And just to wrap up, the final objective of objective 6 here was a quick analysis between our vendor and employee data to identify potential ghost vendors. So this is kind of getting into some of the data analytics we've discussed our team developing and building. So essentially what we did is a comparison of employee data versus vendor data. 2 aspects we looked at were banking information. Was there any overlap? The test showed there was no overlap, so that was a good sign. The other set of data we looked at were addresses, primary addresses. This analytic discovered 53 shared addresses between employees and vendors. So while this says to us that does not mean 53 issues of fraud or anything of that nature, it does mean that we should do our due diligence, and we turn this over to our purchasing department, who is performing a detailed review to review legitimacy, potential conflicts of interest, and related party disclosures. So I think this also says to us as an opportunity for internal audit to partner with purchasing to talk through all of those things in terms of what are our standards, procedures, and controls. So that's objective 6 very briefly. And I really do appreciate the participation from the Treasurer's Office. This was a very large project. And as I started with saying, the biggest sentiment from the report is the manual nature. Where I was remiss in saying is not only the manual nature of the work that the AP team does, but also the reliance they have on the entire district. As you heard Joseph say, you need someone to come in and receive, and you need your invoices provided by the vendor to have the proper information. So it's really all of those aspects being readily available and expedited, which that automated process, as Joseph mentioned, will encourage, because we'll have to have required fields that vendors provide and things of that nature. So I think the takeaway is there isn't anything of glaring concern, but there is really an eminent need to automate the accounts payable process.
So for the 53, it says that purchasing is looking into that. Is there any other update with respect to that? Because that, as an auditor, that piques mine a little bit.
Mine as well. So Trina's team is working through the review. They've noted, is this a spouse? Is this the same employee? The majority of the feedback that we've gotten, or the feedback we've gotten, is that the majority of the 53 haven't had a purchase order since 2016. So those actually are vendors that probably just need to be closed and removed from the system. So it really is a small number that do have a legitimate, hopefully a legitimate relation, but it raises the question of what kind of disclosures do we need and how do we ensure there aren't conflicts of interest in our purchasing practices. That starts to push us a little into purchasing, which I would say is a plug potentially for a fiscal 23 project, looking at contract or vendor management, because I think that's a whole realm in and of itself. Great. So we'll go ahead and move on to P-card if that's okay.
If you would, I think maybe add that to the list of things to follow up on and maybe even just report on at our next meeting if we've got a better feeling for that 53. I think we would be interested in hearing more about that.
Absolutely. We're on it. Wonderful. So, all right, mindful of time, we will aim to wrap up here at 6 o'clock. We have Kevin Ashley that has the financial updates that are summarized in your packets. So if needed, it can be a written report as well, I believe. Yes, it can be a written report as well if needed, and time for our other matters, I believe.
The board members have to leave for an executive session at 6 and need a little bit of a break prior to this, since, well, everybody always needs a break. Let's just say that. Just wanted to make sure that the treasurer expressed her disappointment that she could not be here, that she is away out of town at a funeral. Also, we want to thank our interim Chief Operations Officer up there, Ms. Solano, who was here in case any questions arose regarding transportation, as well as get a good look-see at all the things that are being reported. We appreciate that. And the update that we have from the district is that we are nearing the end of the superintendent search. And it is for that topic we will leave. And again, thank you all. If my members have any other questions, okay, or comments, thank you. And thank you, folks, for the presentation, and good luck with the rest of it.
Thank you. So we'll hop right into the P-card audit report, and I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible, and then perhaps we can visit questions at the end just so we can ensure we at least give you some insight into each aspect of the report. So this report, starting with the executive summary, this report is a follow-up audit of the original audit that was performed in fiscal year 2018. So every year you might be familiar or remember us going through and doing a status update to where all of our past recommendations are in terms of implementation. And so what we found through those conversations is that the procurement card had made significant progress, kind of like we were seeing with benefits. Once it gets to the point of implementation, we revisit to assess how things are going. So what we have to report in summary is that the majority of things that were reported and were noted in the initial audit have been in fact remediated. So I would say this is probably one of the biggest transformations of the projects we've done to date. The systems that are in place have come so far, but still the sentiment, very similar to accounts payable, is the manual nature. So it's the issues that we see sometimes are due to the manual processing, but really at the end of the day, is this sustainable long-term, and how do we get to that next level of efficiency? So we're doing it really well now, but how do we do it better? You can see the project timing scope is captured there, and we focus this audit on fiscal 22 to date. Luckily, this audit just has 4 objectives that we predominantly will focus on objective 2 for the sake of today's conversation. That's the control testing. But as I mentioned before, the audit ratings and the risk ratings are summarized. So moving on to page 5. So as I mentioned before, the purpose of the procurement cards are either for travel or for vendors who don't accept a purchase order and issue invoices. The number of cardholders in the fiscal year 22, as we mentioned before, are 271 cardholders. It's important to note that the P-card purchases only account for less than 0.5% of our non-personnel expenses. However, they take a significant amount of time to handle and process and reconcile. So also, just to set the scene, the purchasing card program is owned by 2 departments. The setup and the maintenance of the cards themselves are owned by the purchasing department, and then the reconciliation and review and invoicing for improper purchases is owned by the Treasurer's Office. So very quickly, objective 1 was, as I just mentioned, those 18 original findings and recommendations from the original audit. So while we got status updates in the past, this audit allows us to dig deeper and essentially update that implementation status. So through those further conversations, we found that 11 of the 18 are in fact fully remediated, and 7 of the 18 are still in progress. So if you're interested in additional detail, Appendix 1 at the very back of the report summarizes, I believe Appendix 1 summarizes all of the statuses of those recommendations. So of course our recommendation is for management to revisit those 7 and come up with a full plan. But what we utilize this for in terms of objective 2 was to prioritize what controls need to be retested and which ones are not as high of a priority anymore. So here in objective 2, like I mentioned, we pulled controls that we tested last time, and then we also identified other critical controls to test for the first time this year. So we broke the controls into 3 categories. Controls 1 through 5 are around cardholder initiation, issuance, and maintenance. That relates to our purchasing department. Controls 6 through 8 relate to the approval and documentation, which is the reconciliation piece that our treasurer's office performs. And then controls 9 and 10 relate to misuse of the cards. So with respect to time, I'm just going to go through really quickly and tell the biggest takeaways from the testing. Essentially, all of those tables include the control, and then below the control, you'll see the attribute that was tested, as well as the number of exceptions. And as we said before, we tell management immediately of these exceptions. So as of the time of this report, have they been remediated? So an X means no, and a check means yes. So the testing around controls 1 through 5 basically let us understand the need for improved processes and consistency in the cardholder agreements that must be signed every year, as well as the training that cardholders must go through. Due to the disruptions with COVID over the past couple of years, unfortunately, due to some staffing shortages in the department, this process has fallen by the wayside. And it's really critical as we think through this as a whole process. The reason we need the cardholders to do the training and sign the agreement is so then the treasurer's office has less to note as exceptions during the reconciliation. And ultimately, we have the ability to hold people accountable because they agreed to follow the rules. So I think this is a rather straightforward fix. Purchasing departments on it, and that's something they're going to work through over the next year or for the next school year. And then finally, the new test that we performed this year, C5, this is around the users within the PNC Active Pay system. This is a control we hadn't tested previously, and we found that of the 475 users, not cardholders, but users in the PNC system, 137 of them are no longer active employees. So while it does sound like a shocking factor, the controls or the real risk, quite frankly, that they could make significant changes in the PNC system, I'm not overly concerned. However, that is a process that now purchasing is aware of, that we need to be doing reconciliations between our terminated employees and ending those accounts. And similarly, we did evaluate active cards to active employees, identifying 2 cards that were still open that are held by terminated employees. So we did some root cause analysis and found that one of those employees was on administrative hold. So it really sparks the recommendation as to how do we develop a process, how does purchasing develop a process to indicate and flag those kind of less typical situations. Because as of the remediation actions they took from the last audit was that they now have a really strong process that when an employee terminates in HR, that the card is immediately inactivated. So it's a really good process for the norm. It's just the exception that fell through. And so moving on, I might just keep on going, Emma, if that's okay. So Emma did a great work around these next set of controls, but essentially we found that the majority of the items regarding controls 6 through 8 were functioning as intended. However, we do believe there's an opportunity for more targeted approval and review of the documentation for each procurement card transaction. So what becomes really burdensome in this process is the manual nature, the follow-up, the incomplete documentation that's initially submitted that someone in the treasurer's office then has to go back and follow up and find. Very similar to what we saw with AP, the reaching out to those who are outside the department. So this is an area that would be improved through additional participation and prioritization from our cardholders. And I think the thing that's really notable is the escalation process that's been put in place since we initially performed this audit in 2018. It was, as our treasurer loved to say, she says, we'll educate and then we'll hold you accountable. And I think I've done a really nice job of doing that. So right now, if you don't submit the documentation within a timely manner, or you have an inappropriate transaction, you will be receiving an invoice to pay back the funds that you could not support. So I think from a detection perspective, it's really strong. I think the prevention side will be enhanced when we increase the training. Anything significant? Are we good? Good, we're just gonna keep flying. So then finally, objective 3, we'll just move on, is around a flow chart. So essentially, we've been able to build upon our control structure. I just wanted to note the final 2 pages of your report contain a full flow chart that our wonderful team member, Emma, performed for us. And so that shows each iteration of these audits we're able to perform. You'll hear in this audit, we talk a lot more about targeted control testing, and it's because we had enough familiarity with the environment to really document and create that. So that is something we continue to emphasize the importance of to our management team to self-develop. So that way when we come in, we say, what are your controls? What is your process? And then they tell us, rather than us having to discover that like we did through objective 1 in AP through these very thorough conversations and mapping. That's just another iteration of growth for both management as well as audit. And then finally, objective 4 was an evaluation of the data being complete and accurate, and we did not come across any issues of incomplete or inaccurate data from a population standpoint. So I believe that concludes the purchasing card presentation. I know we have Trina Levins here as well if you do have questions from the perspective of her team as well.
Any questions? Okay.
Wonderful. So that's that 5 minutes. Let's see.
All right, we made up some time. Kevin, I guess the district update was already given, so Eve yields those 5 minutes back. So Kevin, if you want to give a very high level brief financial update.
Certainly, I can be very brief. So good to see you all today, though. One thing I did want to point out, there are a few hard copies of the annual comprehensive financial report that Kevin referred to. If you'd like to take one of those. Otherwise, I know a version, I believe, was posted in board docs, and I've sent it over to be added to the district website as well. So you'll have electronic versions, or you can have a hard copy as well. Pleased with the results of the audit. I said at Finance Committee, appreciate the efforts of everyone in the Treasurer's office, the Superintendent's office, dining services, facilities, they all have a part in making sure that everything is done. So we appreciate that. Just quickly on the monthly financial update. This focuses on general fund, cash balances, revenues, and expenses. And then also, there's a little bit of information about school-wide pool, which is our Fund 598. We mainly highlight the expenditures there. That is funded through transfers from the general fund and a couple of the grant funds. And then there's some slides relating to preschool tuition assistance that are included at the back. But the main thing I just want to point out is there's really nothing that wasn't expected. We did see our property tax advances from Hamilton County were delayed slightly. So that brought our revenues and cash balances down a little bit. But in the last week, we received over $78 million on our first round of advances. And I checked the account today from another, we actually received an additional 65 million. So we pretty much are getting our February settlement a little bit, some later, some earlier. And then when we get the final settlement, it'll round out that. So happy about that. The other thing that I've mentioned previously is the state funding changes relating to where we used to get pass-through funding for community school students, for scholarship amounts, et cetera. Now we are no longer getting that. So our revenues, if you look comparatively year over year, revenues are down, but those charges are down as well. And there's still a lot of fluid things with the state budget. Department of Education just recently gave us some of the data of how they've calculated everything for every district. We initially thought we'd get that in December, then January, and then we finally started seeing more of the calculations this month. So we're working through that process, and we're hopeful that that's going to be a positive for the district. So, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I saw included in here was the budget timeline. Is there anything you want to highlight, or is there any role that the audit committee can help play in that?
I saw that in the packet. Did that come from Ms. Wagner?
Yeah, I think Treasurer Wagner had a few things she may have wanted to speak to, but if we're not certain as to her exact topics, we could circle back, and I'm happy to send communication out to the audit committee in terms of points of engagement, perhaps for the audit committee.
I know it's been updated, so we can most definitely forward that information.
Is there any other comments, questions, concerns from the audit committee members?
Not about the budget update, but sort of a request potentially for our next meeting is, we've seen across the country a large amount of teaching staff resigning and leaving the profession. We saw our schools shut down for 2 weeks because of issues with keeping staff in the building. And so I would love to I see it as a major risk for our district of just staff retention and ensuring that we have staffing to operate next year. And so I'd love an update on whether the district sees this as a risk or if there's any mitigating efforts in this area.
Lauren, could you add that to our planning agenda?
Absolutely.
To
I think
discuss?
Assistant Superintendent Bunty and team who spoke earlier might be able to provide some insight, so I'll reach out to her. And just as a forewarning or heads up, if possible, since we deferred the training session that we had planned for today, as Ms. Wagner wasn't able to attend, we probably will have that at the April meeting. So let's tentatively, if agreeable to the group, tentatively plan for a 4:30 to 6:30 meeting just to build in for that presentation as well as some training conversation. I know we squeezed our meeting from 6:30 to 6 today, but I think next time we could use the extra half hour if that's okay.
Okay, if there's no other business, then our meeting is adjourned.